se on Digia.
Näetkö me jostain paljon meillä katsojia? Okay. All right. Haluatko sä Erik kertoa lyhyesti aluksi vähän tästä koko hommasta? Niin kuin ihan muutama sana. Se on ehkä luonnollisempaa, että sä teet sen. Mä voin sen jälkeen. Heti kun when Erik is ready.
All right, so thank you for coming. We're starting the first JavaScript tribe event. And the purpose of the tribe is to build a community around JavaScript and Node so that people can help each other out. And today we're going to have a couple of lightning talks about GraphQL and Apollo. So I'll give the mic over to Chris.
Yeah, all right, thanks. All right, let me just get set up quickly. All right, so how many of you know what GraphQL actually is? Do you have any clue? Have you tried it? All right, so some people know. All right, have you actually gotten around to try it out and do any cool stuff with it, or just like is it on a like an I know what it is kind of level? Have you used it?
Yes.
Yeah. Of course, some people have used it. In our department, we used it quite a lot actually, even in production. Today I thought I'll have a quick short talk about what GraphQL is, so that you hopefully walk away with some knowledge of what GraphQL is, and no one can, and like if someone comes and asks you about GraphQL, you'll be able to at least to some extent tell them what you can gain by using GraphQL and why you should use it. All right, so basically, in a nutshell, GraphQL is a better REST API, or it gives the tooling to build a better REST API. On the following slides, I have some. I think, let's see if everything is connected. Yeah, all right. So here I summarized it as a developer-friendly way to build your API. So you probably all have built REST APIs. Who has built a REST API before? All right, so everyone is familiar with that concept, and you probably also know with the shortcomings of a REST API. For example, documentation, and especially when the documentation is out of date, you'll be very frustrated and trying to wrap your head around why the API is not working as it should, and so forth. There's other problems also, like underfetching and overfetching, and the N+1 problem. If you know what that is, at least one team in our department knows very well what that problem is. We were working on a project where we had to get user permissions. Every permission needed a separate request, and it took like 200 requests, or maybe I'm lying a little bit, but a lot of requests to just do like a simple thing which could be done with one query. All right, so I've listed some points about the gains you can easily get from GraphQL. But first, some people didn't know what it is. So basically, it's a technology or a tool or a specification built by Facebook and open sourced in 2015. And as far as I know, It was initially developed 2013 for Instagram in particular, and then later they noticed that maybe we have something here that could be built into a community, and yeah, that basically bootstrapped the kind of spreading of GraphQL. And I think still, if you're using GraphQL in production today, you're very much on the cutting edge. It's a very new thing, even though it's already like years old. That's essentially what it is. So it has nothing to do with graph databases. That's a common misconception. And also, the only thing it basically is a way to define your API schema. There's basically different operations that each have a way to resolve their data, but that is basically just a function that returns the outcome. It has nothing to do with persistence. The data can be hard-coded, or it can come from a database or a cache or whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care about where your data is coming from. It's just basically the blueprint for your API, so to speak. All right, so a little bit on the good part. GraphQL is it's like, to its nature, it's here hierarchical. So, which means that basically, if you have a blog, you can query your blog and all the posts and all the images for that blog post all in one query, and it's all a first-class functionality of your API. Basically, you can combine whatever parts of the schema and query it in a way you need for your particular use case. So let's say you only need the title, a short teaser, and the image of your blog post. You can just query those three things, and you can get rid of overfetching. So you don't have to do the traditional REST API thing where you get 200 fields and you only need 3. While this might not be, from some perspective, that important, on mobile connections and other slow connections, it's actually very common and frustrating problem to solve. And of course, you can solve this in a REST API, but it usually takes some complex logic, and you don't want to maintain that kind of logic. So GraphQL kind of does that for you. The next thing we have is, so we have this thing called introspection in GraphQL. It's basically a way to query the API to give a definition of what the API looks like. So basically, you do a query, and you can have documentation out of the box. So the tooling around GraphQL allows you to just specify your GraphQL endpoint, and then you can just browse your schema. You can see, like, I have these operations, and they return these types and these fields, and they have types that have like other fields and so forth. I can show this in practice really quick at the end if you have time. It's also strongly typed, so maybe people have worked with typed variants of JavaScript or other typed languages. Do you have, like, is there a lot of people who are experienced with typings like TypeScript or languages like Go or others that are strongly typed? Do people know? All right, so basically GraphQL has its own type system, but it's not that complex. There's, like, I think, quickly counting, like 10 built-in types. So basically this allows you to describe your API on a very specific detail, so you can, or level of detail. So basically, if you have, let's take the blog post example. So you could have a blog that has posts, and the post has a title, which is of type string, and then you can have is published, which is like a flag, so it's type Boolean, and then you can have like image, or an array of images. In GraphQL, you would say a list of images that each have an image type, which can have other fields like URL, maybe, that is type string, and so forth. So this helps kind of keeping everything very very functional and easy to understand, and it also does a lot of validation out of the box. So it will help you if you mistype your queries. It will tell you, most likely tell you what's wrong. It's also versionless, so everyone probably that has built a REST API have some idea of what it means to version your API. So in GraphQL you can just deprecate fields and operations, and you can kind of like maintain those for a while, but when you know that no one is using it, you can just drop the field completely, just delete it from the schema. The only thing you're gonna have to think about is backwards compatibility. If you have outside integrations, then you of course have to maintain the deprecated API, but I think that's far better than API versioning as you normally do it. This actually goes into so much detail. We'll just skip this. I'll just mention that basically you have two types of operations you can do. You have queries which fetch data and mutations which mutate data. So let's say like get users is a query, while update user or create user are examples of mutations. You can dig into that yourself. Then very short about the schema. So the schema has basically fields and types and resolvers. So a field is something you can query basically. A type is the type of what you're querying, like let's say a string or a blog post or whatever. And the resolvers are essentially just lambda functions. So not as in AVS lambda, but like anonymous functions that return data. You can of course, like in languages like Java, you will have resolver classes and so forth. It's just like a concept. Also, it's very widely supported today. So the reference implementation done by Facebook is in JavaScript, and there's definitely room for improvement in that code base. I've recently been digging into this JavaScript implementation in very very detailed dive into the JavaScript implementation, because we have been working together on a PHP implementation that is basically done from scratch, because the current PHP implementations are rather bad, or they're not. They don't really support very well to use the more advanced features of GraphQL. They're basically like works out of the box, but then if you want to do something special like custom query validation or whatever, you can't really do it because it's just poorly implemented. But there's also a very robust implementation in Scala and also Java, and you have one in Go, and there is one in Python and one in Ruby. So pretty much every language is already represented on a, like, depending a little bit on the ecosystem how well they're implemented, but in general they are well supported. And yeah, that's basically it. You can find me on Twitter and on GitHub as Chrisu83. It's a very old relic username, but I don't really want to change it anymore, so I'll just have to live with it. Other than that, go check out digiaonline.github.io. It's our open source portfolio. It basically highlights some projects that we'll be working on, and it's also like a place where we can promote new projects like this GraphQL implementation. Yeah, the GraphQL implementation can be found under the Digia Online/GraphQL-PHP. And if you have any experience with PHP or otherwise you're interested, come in and give a helping hand, because we're going to need all the help. I would say that we're like 80% done, but usually the last 20% takes longer than the first 80%, so we're kind of in that phase where we need all the help we can get. All right, thanks. Do you want to see like a really quick demo on how GraphQL works? All right, so let me get. Yeah, I'll just take this. Actually, let's look at the graph. I think they have a. Let's see if this would work now. Let's see if they have a demo of this standalone application example. All right, so there's a lot of tooling. Like the one from the GraphQL team is called GraphQL. It's basically a UI where you can do your queries and look at your schema. But this is a new tool called GraphQL Playground, which is from the GraphQL company, which is basically like a backend as a service for GraphQL. It's graph.cool. They have a lot of good blog posts, so go check out their blog if you're interested. So basically, this probably implements the Star Wars API. So there's a lot of different actions you can do here. Like, let's look at for example, all starships here. So here you can now see that that basically this all starship, it returns this kind of structure. You can go into looking like what the starship looks like. So it has a capacity that is of type float, and you have like a class that is type string, and then you can have like connections. Like here's like all the films that this particular starship is involved in, and it can have its own field like episode ID, and you can explain this. The documentation is basically here. It goes right along with the whole API schema explorer tool. You can also search let's say you do starship. So here you can find a starship like this as well. So basically we have a query here. Let's change the color scheme to the light one because this is rather hard to. I think it's light. Yeah. So here's a query, and if we hit play, you get back every single thing you asked for in the exactly same format that you asked for it. So here you can have autocomplete. So let's say we want something with N. All right. So there's for the pilot there's gender. So let's query gender too. So now you get the gender here as well. So basically you can just say I only want the pilot's name. And then you could say there's some things like order by height descending. So if we do like name ascending, you can change the order and basically this works exactly the same as if you had a REST API, just a nicer user interface for using it. But that's basically it. Here's another example query where you query all the planets. And there's one obvious field missing here, which is name. So we can just get the name, and here is everything. But I think Ville is going to continue and tell a little bit more about the tooling around GraphQL and how you can use this in your, for example, React application. All right.
Questions?
Yeah, does everyone have a good understanding now of what GraphQL essentially is and what you can do with it? All right. All right. But you at least know, probably have an idea of whether or not it's worth looking into what you can do with it, and like if you have some chance to try it out, I would strongly recommend to try it out. Yeah, sure.
I have a question, like if you come to GraphQL from, let's say, REST code and start implementing the APIs, what were or did you come up with some kind of like troubles or challenges or something that should be designed fundamentally different way that you realized after doing or starting?
So there's different approaches. If you have a REST API that you built for years, you can still use GraphQL. The way I would do it is I would create, maybe using serverless, I would create a GraphQL API that actually queries the REST API and just exposes the schema as well documented as it should. So you have documentation for all the types and all the fields and everything, and then you can kind of like, if you have an old API and you're building a new like UI application, you could just switch to GraphQL, create the proxy. I actually did this like this week for one project. So I have this really like simplistic admin UI. We didn't have any admin UI before. I've been doing this is like a off-work project, and we have a pretty large REST API, but I only needed like a fraction of the functionality. So I just implemented a serverless application that exposes the GraphQL endpoints, also the playground for it, and other tooling. So that's actually like a very neat way to start, because then you can use something like Apollo, which Ville is going to talk about next, to kind of have this extra benefit of doing GraphQL. You'll see like why it actually makes sense to do this. Like having an API like that is one nice part, but I think like the UI tooling that comes with the GraphQL ecosystem is far more useful than just this API part. So,
which tools did you use to make this proxy?
I used the serverless framework, TypeScript. There is actually like a plugin for serverless and TypeScript made by the GraphQL team,
So
and it worked really well.
So you wrote it basically in Node.js?
Yeah.
GraphQL or some other packages?
No, I used the standard tooling. I did use the GraphQL tools, which is from the Apollo team. So there's I kind of like introduced one part at a time, and one thing I would still want to make work is translating the GraphQL schema types into TypeScript, so that you don't have to write them yourself. That I don't have yet, but the API is so kind of small, so it's not that important actually at this point. But that would be really nice if you could just generate the types for TypeScript and use them right from there, because both are typed and the typings are very similar. Syntax just differs. All right, any more questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you put the whole GraphQL API in one single lambda?
Yes.
Okay, so it wasn't that large.
No, and basically what it is that you there's already tooling from the GraphQL tools where you have like a lambda handler for the actual GraphQL part, which wraps the GraphQL implementation, so you don't have to do that. You just give it the schema and the resolvers, and it can do everything after that. So basically the only thing I had to do was write the schema, write the resolvers. So basically it's like an object literal with like query starships, for example, is function, and then I just refer it to some existing function like get starships and give it some arguments, and then it returns the result of that, and that does a query to the REST API.
Yeah, that's completely fine when you have a small API, but when you have a large API, it won't scale that well.
Yeah, but you can also break it into parts.
Yeah.
So you probably want to break your take apart your resolver map basically and put it in multiple files. That's already possible, but for a much larger API, like in my case, it wouldn't make any sense. But yeah, but you can also like use like you normally do on Node. You just have like a file per function. So basically, every single operation resolver could be its own file, and then you just have the resolvers file, which exports a map of all your files. So that's one way to scale it. But you can also break the schema into multiple files. So you have like, let's say, schema part 1 and part 2 and 3, and then you stitch it all together. That also works. And then you can also, I'll mention this shortly, like if you have multiple GraphQL APIs, you can use Apollo's API stitching to stitch those together. So basically, it's a very new feature, and it's not production ready yet, even though we're planning on using it in the Aleph case. But the idea is basically that you can combine two different schemas from different endpoints, and then you can write basically like merge conflict, like functions that resolve the merge conflicts. Like let's say you want to add a user reference to a post, and the user comes from a different API. You could just have the user ID in the post, and then resolve that ID to the actual user, and extend the schema by adding the user to the post type. Then that would work.
That's actually good that you brought that up, because that's one of the problems that you will have when you start scaling it, in a serverless environment.
Yeah.
When you have to split up your schema, you have to
Yeah.
split up everything in different lambda functions, so they don't know about each other. So you have to be able to stitch it, and that's
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah, also if you get into working with Apollo more, join their open source Slack community. They are very friendly and very willing to help with any problems. I had a problem with the API stitching, that there was a bug that caused it not to work in our case, and it took like 10 minutes for someone to reply, and it turned out that he had fixed the problem during the past month, and he said that, hey, I could probably make like a pre-release on NPM, and he made the release. I installed I updated it through Yarn, and just tried it out. First it didn't work, but he did a second release and that worked, so it fixed the problem. So it was like 15 minutes and the problem was solved. And it was a bug I think it was more fundamental than a bug. It was more about like how it was designed to work. But yeah, I strongly recommend to join the Slack community as well.
So we're gonna actually start using API stitching really soon, like in an actual project, so we can then tell how it actually went.
Yeah.
Did it work at all?
Yeah.
Hopefully it works, because everything's dependent on it.
Yeah, HSL also, the team at HSL is also, like at least before I spoke with one of the lead developers there, and he said that they have been looking at this API stitching because they have like 4 different GraphQL APIs for example, the Reittioppas application. And there's no very clean way, there hasn't been a clean way to combine those, but API stitching actually should solve that problem.
We have it running, but we're not querying across different APIs.
Yeah.
So basically, there's one place you can query it from several APIs, but you can't merge different.
Yeah, you can't add fields to, like, you can't like kind of merge them together.
At least not yet.
Yeah, the API stitching, if you just want to like have all the endpoints from one API, from multiple APIs in one place, that works out of the box. It's like 50 lines of code. But then if you want to combine it, it's a little bit more work. If you want to add fields to existing, like references to fields from another API, then that's a little bit more work. But yeah, we're gonna try it in a month, or within the next month probably. So we can probably tell you more about it then. All right. Yep.
Tell a bit more about versioning.
Yeah, there is basically no versioning concept. It's just basically the API is living, so you can basically publish new operations.
Constantly changing, yes.
Hmm?
So it's constantly changing. So
Yeah.
you don't have any like tagged version.
No, there is no versions. You just basically add, like let's say you wanted to change one operation to be named differently. You would just deprecate the old one and introduce a new one, and it would actually, for example, call the same resolver. But of course, you have to think about like deprecation, like normally, like you can't just remove fields if people are using it. So
Because we have in our project this customer wanted to have several APIs,
Yeah.
several versions, multiple versions, older and newer ones,
yeah,
working at the same time.
then you would, you would probably need to have different branches for the versions then and deploy them as separate APIs if you wanted to version it like that. But nothing prevents you from doing that. That's totally fine. Another thing that we recently like had in one when we were making kind of like planning a project, they wanted to have permissions per fields. Like let's say you have to have a certain role to access a certain field on a certain entity. That would be a pain in the ass to solve with a REST API because like it's just too much. But it would actually be pretty like as an idea, it would be very trivial to solve in a GraphQL API because there's things called directives, which let you add logic on the fields. So basically like decorators. So it could probably be solved very easily with that. So GraphQL also gives you kind of like a lot of new options for solving complex problems. I think that's one of the key points about like GraphQL as a whole, like the advanced part. But I can probably have a more advanced session like in some months about like the more advanced features and what you can get with like customizing, like custom query validation and whatnot. So yeah, I'll let Ville continue. I think it's been enough.
Enough.
Yeah, you can, once you get into the Teams channel, you can just write to me there and I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. Did you have your?
Yes, it's.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wait. All right, so we're gonna actually start with my presentation, just generally like how does it feel to start working with GraphQL if you work with REST. And then in the end we're gonna gloss over some like why would you want to use a library like Apollo, but we're not gonna get too deep into that. But more of like yeah, I just wanna tell you how it felt like starting with GraphQL. And yeah, my name is Ville. Hello, I'm a senior front-end developer at Digia. So if you're new to GraphQL, I was supposed to ask that how many of you have used GraphQL, but Chris already did. So
yeah.
This slide doesn't matter anymore. So my initial reaction was to that the queries look weird and big, and how do you work with those? Instead of just calling a REST API and you get some stuff and you work with it. So here's an example of what a query might look like, and you actually saw an example which Chris just showed you. So in the left is the query, and then on the right is the response, and here I'm querying like as a user myself from GitHub, like my repositories. And you can play with the GitHub API on that link if you want to try it, and it's an excellent place to maybe learn a bit how to form GraphQL queries. And then there's the question, how do you know what to write? Like what are you supposed to put in those queries? So you're going to use the GraphQL Explorer or GraphQL. So on the right, you usually have, like Chris showed you, you have the schema laid out, and you know that, okay, these are the calls I can make. And then on the left, you can like build those queries, and then in the middle, you would get the result, and you know, okay, this query works, and now I can put it in the front end, and cool. Awesome. So a couple of fields, how was it like to use it? So all those emojis don't work here for some reason. Okay, so this is more about the flow of development in a project, like in general. So as a front-end developer, I'm like, hey, I need this data, and then I'm like, from the back-end developer, like, okay, can you give me this data? And he's like, okay, I'll give you the data, and he adds it to the GraphQL API, and it feels like developing a REST project. But then, as the project goes on, the discussion goes more like this. So, hey, we need this kind of data actually, and the probability gets higher that you can actually do that query already from the backend. Let's say, like an example. Let's say we have a thread, a message thread, and that message thread has users. So we have had that query before, but let's say we want to query the user's message threads afterwards. So that should be possible when you have the connections already made. So you can much more easily build like the data you need, like as the project goes on. So in the end, it builds you a nice API, which I think is really nice. The GraphQL API when you start to enter that maintenance phase, and maybe you need to add maybe one more view to your some page, like hey, we need this list, and then it's like trivial to add it there instead of starting to okay, I need to get this REST API stuff here, and then I gotta build this view somehow with that data, and it's a bit of a mess with REST. Okay, so using libraries, you can query the endpoint directly with a POST request, but then you have to do the wiring to the UI yourself, and also how do you want to cache it or something, and you maybe want the convenience of using a library. So we've been using in our project the Apollo client, but there's also Relay. I think they probably do pretty much the same things, but we just used Apollo, so it's easier to talk about it. Not sure what Relay does differently, but
yeah, Relay doesn't support server-side rendering, so I think that's
okay, so
kind of a deal breaker.
Okay.
It kind of has the Facebook's focus.
All right. Don't use Relay then. Okay, so it gives you UI bindings to React, Angular, all these kind of frameworks, and also has implementations for iOS and Android, so you can use it pretty much anywhere. And as Chris said, works with server-side rendering, which apparently Relay doesn't, which sounds a bit weird because Facebook does server-side rendering.
Yeah, but not for the places where they use GraphQL. It's
Okay.
not a first-class feature. I think there's some community support, but it's more compared to like what Apollo gives out of the box.
Okay. Okay, and then the Apollo client also has a good cache. When you request stuff, it saves it to the browser or maybe even in the server. Not sure at the server side what does it do, but in the front end side you can query stuff again, and if it's been queried, it knows that okay, this has been fetched, and it's gonna use the front end stuff if you want to use it. So, and then it gives you the also pagination stuff. If you want to, for instance, if you have a lot of let's say you want to query threads, and then you have you're usually able to say that okay, well, I want first 100 threads, but then afterwards you want to get the next 100 or whatever. You can do the pagination with Apollo client easily. And also the caches can be used for other cool stuff like prefetching and optimistic UI. So prefetching will just when we load before we load a view, we can run a query, and then that query is gonna populate the cache with the data, and then afterwards when we actually load the view, it can actually display the data from the cache right away. So this is really nice if we don't want to use that component anywhere else yet. Like we can just say that okay, fetch this data in a query, and yeah, and maybe this is not that useful to see, but it looks nice. And then the optimistic UI is another thing you can do with the cache. You can basically, when let's say you can post a comment, and then you can directly add it to the cache. So it's going to put the comment text body there, and it can already display it on the UI then, because it has it in the cache. And it can also show maybe some kind of loading animation with it. We can put it into the cache data, and okay, this is actually loading. And then when it gets the response from server that, yay, this is done, it's gonna like update the cache and say that, okay, this was it's actually there, and then it can display the comment in a different way in the UI. So you can react to the successful response from the server, and that's pretty much it for this presentation. And do you have any questions? Something wondering about Apollo maybe, or using?
Who created it?
I don't know. Some mysterious entity.
So is there like
Apple.
one guy, a team of guys?
I
like
think
500
it's
or something behind it?
I think it's a bigger organization.
Yeah, it's a commercial company. I
Yeah.
guess they do this open source tools for free, and then they offer consulting.
Oh wait, isn't it? I think it's done by Meteor, the company that does Meteor. So yeah, I think so. So it has a nice. It should have a nice backing, and the documents are top notch, and I highly recommend the library. Yep.
So the query is the string, so how do you manage, for example, update like a long field, I mean the long JSON, and how do you manage to translate that one to the string in the query or whatever? So you get.
Do you mean like if you have a really big query, or
No, I mean.
do you mean like fetching more data?
I mean, for example, if you have you need to update an object in the server.
Yeah.
And do you need to translate that kind of object into string and send it to the query or whatever? Or?
Yeah. Well, in the background, yes, it's gonna transform it into a stringified JSON. But then when you use Apollo, you're gonna just pass in the object, so you don't have to like build it. Like you don't have to think about that it's gonna be like, is this not correctly formatted or something in the string? But you're gonna just give it as a variable, like, and then it's gonna input it. You have basically the query, and then it has placeholders for variables, and then you just pass in the object, and it's gonna get put into the query automatically. So it's yeah, it's not something you have to worry about, like at least when you use Apollo.
So when we don't use Apollo, we have to manually do that by ourselves.
Yes, then we would have to do it manually, but I don't think anyone uses GraphQL directly. So you're gonna have the Apollo probably, or it's gonna get really tricky for you to develop the like UI wiring and all that stuff, like hooking it up to the React and like updating it appropriately when there's something updated on the server. Yep. More questions? All right. Thank you. And you can always ask in the Slack, our Slack, if you got any questions. Of course, we have a lot of GraphQL users nowadays, at least in our Lehdet, so we're happy to help. Okay. Are there any closing words?
Well, that was all. So thank you very much, and thanks everyone for coming in. And there's pizza. If somebody didn't get to bite, please do. And we'll see you guys next time. And feel free to hang out and stay here. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have the next event already scheduled?
No.
No.
It's still to be announced.
Yeah.
So.
Was the plan to have monthly or bi-monthly?
Bi-monthly, probably.
Yeah. So it would be in May.
Yeah, most likely.
Did you really have any questions that you couldn't answer?
No.
Nobody dared that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can use Slack also afterwards.
Are you on Teams?
Microsoft Teams.
Oh yeah, that
That's
one.
a question you cannot answer.
Yeah,
I noticed there is a JavaScript tribe in Teams, right?
yeah.
There is a web version of it, you don't have to install it.
Oh, okay, I'll come there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if we want to reach everyone, I think Teams is like overall the easiest option right now. But I'm also having discussions with people within the organization about how to organize this communication more. It's an ongoing process. But yeah, I think like all in all, what's very nice with Apollo is like if you need to do fetch more, it's like a first-class feature in the library. So you basically have all the tooling ready-made for infinite scrolling. You just need to kind of wire it all together.
Yeah.
With like in React, you can use React viewpoint. It's viewpoint, waypoint, I think, which basically lets you hook into when the component is mounted on the screen, and then you can just call the fetch more function, and it will automatically just give you more results. And it can handle like you can just say that basically skip the first or offset this the amount of data you already have, and then